Hi, Jane. Thank you for joining me in this dialogue. I'm really grateful for the time you are willing to give. I invite you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Raja, and it's wonderful to be here. So, my name is Jane Adsed Grant, and I'm thrilled to be a faculty with the Time to Think. I've been working with the thinking environment for 15 years now, and it's an experience that transformed my life as a parent, as a wife, as a daughter, and as a friend. And I've been hugely inspired by this work. And so, today, in my work as a coach, a leadership facilitator, and teacher, I'm able to share the thinking environment, not only in the way we lead, but also in the way we live our lives. I'm based in England. I live in the southeast of England in Essex. And I'm a mum of two beautiful girls, both of which are at university these days.
Thank you, Jane. So, before we start the dialogue, since our dialogue is on the component of feelings, can you introduce the way in thinking environment what feelings are?
Well, thank you. So, feelings being one of the key parts of one of the 10 components, as you said, and I love the fact it's in there. And we would describe it at its simplest term as welcoming the expression of feelings. However, when we look at what we mean by that and what we mean by the component of feelings is we recognize that unexpressed feelings can inhibit our thinking. So, what we mean by the component of feelings as a thinking partner, as a coach, or as a facilitator, we will welcome feelings and we'll let people know that we welcome the expression of their feelings. And the reason why it's significant is that feelings will often be triggered by our thinking. And if we cannot express them, we won't be able to think well. So we encourage the expression of feelings, Raja, rather than stepping over them or quietening them, or even as society would say, we leave our feelings at the door.
Thank you, Jane. So, the question that we will look at is what does feeling mean as a component in our independent thinking? Yeah.
Okay, beautiful.
What do you think?
Well, if I was to expand on what I've just shared, I think for me, it's letting others know that we welcome feelings rather than stepping over them. And so for me, it is creating the environment of the sort of psychological safety where people will not be fearful of retribution or ridicule if they were to express their feelings. What about you? What do you now think?
So, one thing I have seen is, especially when people start thinking, the second question we use,
Mm.
right? So, what more do you think or feel or want to say? When we repeat it multiple times, if in the previous waves, if they have thought only expressed thoughts, I have seen people starting to actually talk about their feelings. So that question I have seen really brings out the component of feeling very, very well. And I have seen people really, after all the waves of thinking, they really dip into their feelings. So that's been my experience. What do you think?
Well, I think also we don't know where we're going to come up face to face to a feeling. So when we're in a thinking environment with another, whether it be a thinker or even a thinking partner, because as a listener, we'll also be appreciative and even triggered for some around what other people are sharing with us. As a human being, we cannot fail to notice or be moved by the emotions and feelings of another. So I think this component of feelings impacts both the thinker and the thinking partner. And as a thinker, we won't know when we're going to trigger an emotion until we've said it, until we've thought it and said it, kind of thing. So I find that fascinating. And knowing that when we're in a thinking environment, the safety and the listening free of judgment makes me as a thinker feel more relaxed and okay to share my emotion. What more do you think?
Yeah, what you said is very interesting. Uh, One of the things that happens in a thinking environment is that we are not judging the other person. And many a times, not only our thoughts, even our emotions, we don't express, we feel because of the fear of being judged. Like in preparation for our conversation, I read this book called Hazards of Being a Male. And there is a chapter which talks about feelings, the real male terror. So it's a quite old book written by a Jungian. It really talks about how in most societies, especially men are not allowed to not feel, forget about not express, they are not allowed to feel, hence they suppress. And it also talks about how mostly the male heroes are achievers, strong men, never cried, all that. So I think that's something that really is the key thing about. I don't know about your culture, at least in my culture from childhood, especially men or the boys are told emotions is not for you. So that way, helping them to touch it, recognize it is a beautiful thing. What do you think?
Well, I would say in my experience, the culture is not dissimilar in that boys and men are brought up not to necessarily express emotions such as tears or um, yeah, anything remotely vulnerable. And yet they are, I don't know whether encouraged, but it seems okay to express anger or frustration. And I think sometimes we can overlook and misunderstand what a certain emotion is actually means. So, for example, a woman crying isn't necessarily that she's upset.
Yeah.
Well, she'd be upset, but it may not be through what we think she's upset about. A shed of tears could be of utter frustration. She may demonstrate it with tears, and a gentleman might demonstrate it with a thump on the desk with his fist.
Mm.
But for me, the component of feelings in being a thinking environment is to welcome whatever emotion is being expressed. But I would say, with a word of warning, in a way that's appropriate. Because as a thinking environment, we are adults, and there is a degree of let's be adult about this. So I'm not going to throw my toys out all out of the pram in this moment, and you have to put up with my frustration and anger. Actually, I want to welcome your anger, and I'm going to sit and hold the space for you to allow that feeling to be expressed in a way that's appropriate for the environment in which we're at. I've had an experience, for example, in a team where a team member has been very vocal in her discontent about her leader, and it was really inappropriate in a group setting. And so I invited them to take a pause and we recontracted for what was appropriate and what was not. And I've equally had a situation where somebody's been listening to some other member of a team and has got so angry he just walked out the room. And that was his way of dealing with the emotion. And that's okay because emotions are welcome, feelings are good. Once he had gathered himself afresh, he came back in. And we couldn't not speak about it because it would have been, the elephant in the room. But we both, and everyone else, were able to have a conversation about the trigger for the frustration and anger and deal with it appropriately. But it's because we didn't ignore it. What do you now think?
Yeah, so something that comes to me is uh, the singular purpose of thinking environment is to help a person to think independently, right? So, in some sense, it is not a therapy session where the person can really experience and express the depth of the emotion. So, like I remember one person, I think in one of my thinking partnership course, actually asked me a question about the feelings because she's also a therapist. So I told her, this is time to think, it is not time to feel. So in some sense, basically here, looking at the objective, we acknowledge the feelings, we allow release of the emotions and feelings to the level that helps the person to start thinking again. So that seems to be the way I have seen it. What do you think?
Oh, that's so interesting for me. In my experience, the thinking environment encompasses our feelings. And in my experience, through my coaching clients, through to people on my trainings, have found it an opportunity to really delve deep into their feelings. We find that one of the most common further outcomes, if we are holding a thinking session with somebody, is they come and they say, I want to feel differently. I want to feel less anxious. I want to feel more confident. I want to feel the self-belief in me. I want to stop worrying, a feeling. And so, interesting for me, even though it's referred to as the thinking environment, for me, the thinking encompasses all of our intelligences in our head, in our heart, and our gut. And my experience is that I work with a lot of people who are very kind of in their head. My client base is typically lawyers, bankers, and consultants because I work in the City of London predominantly. I do have clients outside that, and I really notice the reason why I think they enjoy this way of being is because they get out of their head into their heart and they do get to express their feelings because they know that in front of me, I won't judge. And as you said earlier, that it's one of the key things the thinking environment enables for another. It's to have the psychological safety, is to be listened to free of any judgment, and to freely express themselves and step up to and into who they were created to be, quite frankly. And so I find this actually feelings is a core part of being a thinking environment, to express them, to delve deep, to explore them. And yeah, it's very much part of thinking. I don't think we can think without feelings and we can't have feelings without thinking. They are interchangeable. What do you now think?
Yeah, and just what you said, I remember in Carl Jung's perspective, especially the MBTI, very interestingly, they call the rational logic and emotional logic. So it's a very, very interesting way. So both have logic. So they are not, many a times we think our feelings are irrational. But I think feeling has its own logic and its own place. And even as a person, there are times when I have facilitated workshops and I change what I planned. Suppose I work with another colleague, they will ask me, why did you do it? Okay, so my answer usually is, I felt like, and I will find why it happened maybe after some time. But many a times when it came from that, I felt like it worked. So apart from that, what I see is also it's about intensity of the emotions. For example, when I look at any decision I have taken in my life because of fear, if I look back at my entire life, I can see that most of the time it has gone wrong. So basically, also, if you really interestingly look at fear, is also coming from some limiting assumption. So once the person feels it, acknowledges the fear, then probably they're able to look at what is the source in terms of the limiting assumptions. And sometimes in recent times, I've seen once they go to the limiting assumption, sometimes they also go back to thinking about what is the source of past experience from which it has come. So I really see, I think, intense fear, pain, some of these emotions, once people acknowledge it, they're also able to go to the source, which is the limiting assumption. Yeah. If they don't acknowledge it, they won't even go that side. Yeah, true. What do you think?
Well, I think it's fascinating the societal play on feelings. In that, when we think about organization, sometimes we'll hear people say, well, leave your feelings at the door, or leave your emotions at the door. We want your thinking, or and that's good if they say we want your thinking. We don't even hear that these days. But I think that's erroneous and it's misplaced in the workplace because I feel that leaders who truly listen to their team members with care, with empathy, and with a desire to help the person become unstuck and grow as to who they are meant to be will be way more successful in relation to engaging team members, increasing productivity, innovation, and actually mental well-being. So there are many reasons why embracing our humanity through our emotions, through welcoming feelings, is not only a good thing to do, it's essential. What do you now think?
Yeah, I'm looking at even my life outside of thinking environment. So when I have been in spaces of, like, for example, this year, after my mother's death, I think I somehow feel I was almost in depression for a reasonable time. And very interestingly, all that I did was multiple thinking sessions. I, I didn't go for therapy, even though previously I have been in therapy. And each conversation has opened up multiple layers for me to look at in terms of the connection I had and what I really was missing. And hence what assumptions I held about me as a son. So it was very, very interesting how it was connected to my own self concept as a person, as a professional, multiple things. So, yeah, what you say is true because even though we don't say that this is therapy, doing thinking sessions on difficult emotions can be healing. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think that's beautiful. And interestingly, was my experience when my dear dad died back in 2023. My thinking partners, including Nancy Klein, um, were a phenomenal source of strength for me. It was a really emotional time. I think I cried for 6 months, and I never once felt judged. I felt liberated. And I turned up on the call, but not expecting to reveal emotions, but of course they just bled, bled. Um, but I will always remember those sessions and the healing impact. I love what you said there. That really resonated with me. And I think it was the release of emotions in a very safe place that enabled me to celebrate Dad's life. Um, I'll always miss him, and I think about him every day. And I'm grateful for having as many years on this planet as I did with him and for what he did for me and the legacy he left. So it was a beautiful way to move through a very human emotion of grief. What do you now think?
Yeah, I'm thinking, for example, when my father died, I was 29, and now I'm 55, 56. Very interestingly, I actually faced the emotions for 6 months. So recently I was thinking about it. It took exactly close to 6 months for me to accept that I have to move on. And especially the difference with the emotions of what I experienced with my mother is, in some sense, I realized that this is one person who always made me feel important and loved unconditionally. And in many of the thinking sessions, what I realized was that person is no more and no one can replace that person. Hence, I have to find it within me. So that is the biggest realization, especially in the last 6 7 months. Yeah. What do you think?
I'm grateful for you sharing that. I think it's a beautiful reflection. Thank you. I guess what I'm now thinking is the significance of feelings, how they impact every aspect of our life, and how feelings are part of who we are as a human being. I think we're human beings with feelings that do things. We're not human doings. Um, so I think that feelings is the very essence of who we are. And in my experience, feelings have been a fantastic guide. And when I'm feeling a certain way, I don't always know why. And I'll go back in my mind and think, where's this coming from? What is this? What is this sharing? What is this teaching me? So yeah, it's reminding me how significant they are. And it's our feelings, our emotions are who we are as human beings. And so in order to welcome them and to feel comfortable, and I think I shared earlier that the feelings component impacts both the thinker and the thinking partner. And I remember one time as a thinking partner, my thinker was very emotional and sharing an incredibly on the edge of your seat experience through her thinking and moved me beyond belief. And all I wanted to do was weep. And yet I wanted to hold the space and I didn't want to detract her from what she was saying or how she was able to express herself. So I held it together, Raja. And then as soon as we'd finished the session, we had ended with an appreciation, I burst into tears. I think it was just every ounce of my body was not wanting to do that. And afterwards, she commented and she said, thank you for being such an amazing space for me to process my own emotion. And equally, seeing you now get so upset is revealing to me how touched you were with what the story I was sharing with you. So I guess it was my being vulnerable, being willing to share my emotion, but I didn't want it to be about me. So it all happened afterwards. But that was a session I'll never ever forget. What more do you think or feel or want to say on this topic?
So something that comes to me from what you said is about managing the response stream.
Mm.
So many a times when someone is uh, emotional, in a physical space, it's different. Online, it's different. Just being there without saying it's okay to be than doing anything is the most difficult thing for, I think, most people. Because like, for example, there are times I've done workshops in organizations on dealing with emotions. And I have asked this question to many men. How many of you in this room are happy in a one-on-one if one woman employee starts breaking down? How many of you can just keep quiet and comfortably face it? So, usual answer is no one. Because the moment we see vulnerable emotions in someone else, I think our response becomes challenging. I think I think as a thinking partner, I think holding that response stream not to overtake us is very critical. Yeah, I think from what you said, that's what I think you just held the response stream tightly so that you did not, in the time that is given to them, you held yourself. Yeah, true. What do you think?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that as humans, we human beings, we will have a response to what someone else is saying, and that can trigger an emotion in us. And that's okay. And it's not necessarily to abandon that emotion if we're holding a thinking environment for others, or when we are, not if, when we are. And it is, it is to notice it and quieten it in that moment. Because after all, this is the connection that we have created. You've said something that's moved me deeply, and I want to honor that. Um, so yeah, I think it is about managing my own stream of emotion that's going on by saying, I feel you, and I'll quieten you for a minute. So it's not to abandon it, would be my thinking. What more, if anything, do you think or feel or want to say?
So I think now, even if we look at psychology as an evolving field, I think yeah, the interesting thing that comes to me is I am doing little bit of research about how artificial intelligence is going to affect the whole reality that we go through. So one of the key things is that many of this so-called feminine qualities and emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence are some of these things that are going to be more relevant because most of the rational logic things at the lowest level are going to get automated in the next 2 years. So even as a human being, I think to be relevant in this kind of a changing world, I think one's own recognizing and acknowledging feelings is going to be a skill. It's not just about, yeah, in some sense, it's about really being human. But I think the society has probably taken away some of these things through conditioning. So that way, I see very clearly in thinking environment, helping people to really, really touch, play with, and acknowledge their emotions is a very fundamental human need in some sense. So, what do you think?
Well, it's really a question, and I'm wondering your thoughts on what do you think stops people from expressing their emotions, given it will be really important going forward, even more important. And it's not just expressing them because I see a block in labeling them. So I think there's a gap between being able to label how one feels and then being able to express it. And they're two totally different things. But I wonder, what do you think that might be in the way of people labeling and then expressing their emotions?
So, for example, now if you look at, I had for a few years somatic experience therapy.
Mm.
So they use the word called vocabulary of bodily sensations. Okay. So many a times when I went through that for almost 18 months, I realized I have First of all, I don't know what is happening in the body. Second is to articulate exactly this is tingling, this is that, is so difficult because I have lost the vocabulary. So, in some sense, like you say, one is, for example, when I work with people sometimes, especially when people say they feel angry, I ask them, where can you feel? How is it expressing it? If not in the thinking environment, when I do other kind of work, I tell them, okay, now can you just close your eyes and see what is happening to each part of your body, right? Because the first place most of the emotions get expressed is in the body. So many of us, the way the world has become, and because of this conditioning, and also more important to rational and thinking, somewhere people have lost ability to get in touch with, and if they get in touch with, the vocabulary to even speak about. So, like when I do some workshops, at some point I realized in English there are around 600 words for emotions. So, when I went through it, I realized many of those words I don't even, the shades of difference, everything, right? So, I think many a times because of the vocabulary, I think people first don't recognize and acknowledge. Next one is they don't know how to. So first is challenge in noticing. Second is challenge in naming. I think both are there, at least in many people I have worked with. Yeah. So that I think is the challenge. What do you think?
Well, I do too. And I remember reading that beautiful book, Permission to Feel. I just had to look up the author, Mark Brackett. And I think this is a fantastic contribution to the world of emotions, the world of being, our humanity, our leadership. Because in that book, Mark shares with us that I think one of the things that holds us back in recognizing our emotions is we simply don't have the vocabulary to share with them. And, we've all got the vocabulary that we use all the time of the six most common feelings of happy, joy, sadness, frustration, anger, so we've got those and we use those all the time, but it's the others, this is where I'm serene, I'm calm, I feel grateful, I feel with compassion, I feel energized. These ones we use a little less often. So I think the first thing is making the decision to extend our vocabulary for emotions. And the other thing that I think the reason why we don't share them so much is we're not recognized. People ask, what did you do? What did you achieve? What did you accomplish? And then you get, well done. Good boy, good girl. And so all through our education, we get acknowledged and recognized for what we do, not how we're being. And how we're being is how we're feeling. So again, it comes back to society and our education. So I think, as leaders, as parents, as mentors, we have a profound responsibility to encourage people to get in touch with their emotions, to bring them more to the forefront for the very purpose that what we now know is that emotions and the freeing up of them will help us think better, more creatively, more imaginatively, than if we simply suppress them or step over them. Worse still, if we don't enable people to bring their feelings to work or in our family settings, people will not think well. We will not be bringing and sharing and bringing forth their best potential. So in fact, we're doing them a disservice. What more do you think or feel or want to say?
Yeah, I feel sad, but the thing is, when I ask this question, how are you? Whenever I'm meeting someone after a long time, most of the answers will be about what they do. So to that level, the people's identity is with their doing than with the being. I think that's something that suddenly, when I heard what you talked about, it came back to me many times. And yeah, recently I have been working with Maris and Trisha and all quite a bit. So sometimes when we just come into the meeting, they ask me, "How are you?" I tell them, if you're going to ask me, "How are you?" I'm going to take 15 minutes. Because somewhere, I don't know, I think from the age of 20, I have been into T group or L group, whatever they talk, Travis talk and things like that. So, and I think that is when probably from 20, I think I understood that feelings are such an integral part. So, yeah, it's so what you say is true. I think now, even sometimes my son, who's 22, uh, sometimes if I ask him, "How do you feel?" What is this question all about? Okay, sometimes. So, yeah, I think somewhere it goes to our own conditioning and also what is prioritized in the world overall, right? Like I've seen even in India, there are certain cultures where feelings are celebrated. And you will see those people expressing emotions far more comfortably. So, yeah, I think in some sense, helping people to accept it is okay to feel emotional and it's okay to express them. I think that's what the component of feelings for me looks like. What do you think?
Well, I find it fascinating. What's just emerged in my mind is if we, through this beautiful dialogue, recognize the significance of enabling people to label, to share, and to express their feelings, what can we do as leaders, mentors, and parents to help people get more comfortable in that space? So, one of the things I've started to do is to ask people, particularly how they feel, but then I attach it to something. So, how are you feeling this morning? How do you feel today? How do you feel in this moment? And that slightly more laser-like helps them focus a little bit more. And so I get a good response from that. But the interesting thing for me is that I'm okay with feelings because I spend a lot of time in a place where people are very happy to share their feelings with me. But I'm very cognizant of the people that I coach, whereby they feel less comfortable. And the reason that they may not ask that question is because they're fearful of what the response might be.
Mm.
So you just said to me, "Jane, I feel sad." And my heart is feeling that. And equally, though, I see you as a resourceful human being. And I see you as a human being that is sitting with that sadness and at a point where you want to shift that for yourself. I know you can, but it's not for me to shift that. It's not for me to stop you feeling sad. It is for me to be here for you and with you, to continue to express your thoughts and feelings. And I think sometimes people are fearful of asking, "How do you feel?" because they expect
Mm.
either the worst, to your point of all the people you ask in your trainings and they don't know how to deal with somebody, or that they've got to, quote, fix that person, probably the worst thing they could do. So I think it takes courage for us to ask the question and then to sit with the response, but knowing, or rather perhaps considering the person to whom you are in interaction with is a resourceful human being. And we're not there to change that emotion, rather to help them if they want to shift it,
Mm.
rather than shift it for them. What do you now think?
Yeah, something that comes to me is that, especially, like I said, the second question as a thinking partner, the softness with which we ask, what more do you think or feel, right? So, somewhere I have kind of, with practice of few years, the second part, I really, my tone changes to really invite the feel. And yeah, it's very simple, but seems to work. So, yeah, so that's the first thought that comes. And the second thing, I think, yeah, this is something that as a component is very challenging for, yeah, many components are challenging, but this one seems quite a challenging one for many people. Yeah. What do you think?
I think our feelings, our emotions are what make us human and differentiate us from other living beings. And I'm coming away from this dialogue really wanting to nurture my own feelings and not discredit them, and equally continue to welcome the feelings of others and feel comfortable in the knowledge that if people want my support in shifting that emotion, they'll ask. Because the worst thing we can do is trample over those feelings of another, or even discount them or discredit them, or to tell them to stop feeling that way. I find that really kind of, oh, it gets to my core, because you can't not feel frustrated when you're frustrated. So someone says, oh, don't be frustrated. Well, I can't, I am. So I can't not be. I have to process it in order to free myself from it. Um, so I think for me, it's this this dialogue is reminding me and helping me consider afresh to keep expanding my own vocabulary in how I feel, and to encourage others to express how they feel, and let them, they have choice and agency in whether they want to change that feeling. What do you now think?
Yeah, something that comes to me is I have seen people in my culture saying, stop crying, all that, right? So, from what you're saying, what I'm realizing is when someone is going through an emotion, we stop them not because of our love or compassion. It is, we stop them because we are not able to hold and be there in that moment of what happens to us, seeing them go through. So I think that is the ability in being a thinking partner or learning thinking environment. We create a capacity to be with the other person in their emotions and acknowledge what they go through. And also, the most interesting thing is we acknowledge their adults and they can deal with it. So I think those are some thoughts that came to me. What do you think?
I don't know that I have any fresh thoughts now.
Yeah.
It's been incredibly enriching and a beautiful topic to explore with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, what I want to appreciate today in this conversation is, I think, actually the quality of the emotional being you are. I think the topic, I used to wonder why I choose people for some topic. I think you seem to embody living emotions and feelings.
Mm. Thank you. And Raja, the quality I'd love to appreciate in you today is integrity. The very essence, the nature of your being feels, and from the moment I met you, seems you're living this value, this virtue of integrity, of honesty and groundedness. And I admire it and I appreciate it wonderfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, for your time. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You're very welcome.